All for one and one for all. Earlier this week, I finished The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, and I had a lot of fun with this one. I'm not gonna lie. Going into this, I had high expectations because The Count of Monte Cristo is one of my favorite books I read all year. It's probably my favorite classic of all time right now. And, I've always wanted to read The Three Musketeers. It's one of those stories where I've always known about it. It seems like it's so huge in pop culture still 200 years later. So I was really looking forward to this, and I was blown away by how much I enjoyed it. Alexandre Dumas continues to write books that seem like they were written for me. He really is able to capture a part of the human essence, especially human conflict in the heart, in a really, really cool way while not ever being too ridiculous or too unrealistic. And I really appreciate that because, coming into this book, I kind of felt like, oh, Dumas is going to write this story in a very romantic, swashbuckling, fun way. And while that is there is some very romantic parts. There's actually a surprising amount of romance in this, and there is a lot of fun, and there is a ton of swashbuckling. It also has quite a bit of darkness to it. There is some moral complexity here, and I think there's even some pretty good social commentary, especially considering the period of time he lived in. Just a reminder, Alexandre Dumas lived in the 1800s. All right? He probably has very different views on women and certain social issues than we as modern people do. So coming into this, I always try to give an author a little bit of leeway, but I was surprised to find that or at least how I interpreted that Dumas was very gracious to women in this story, and I think his point was actually rather poignant. And instead of a romanticization of the 14 to 1500s, which is I believe when this book is supposed to take place, there is a bit more nuance than that. There's a little bit more moral complexity in this. Because the main villain in this is Milady de Winter, who is a femme fatale. I think she is one of the first in Western literature, and probably, or at least one of the first in Western literature that is like a very famous example of this, stereotype. And she is, this unrepentant sociopath who is using poison. She's manipulating men through sex. She's doing whatever it takes to get to the top, right? She's in it for the long haul. She's in it to win it. She's working alongside this cardinal who is, this very evil, very stereotypically bad leader of the church. So with that, kind of villain, you expect the heroes to be very, do-gooders, some very chivalrous men, some very, morally strong, very morally righteous kind of guys. And that is not what you get at all with the Three Musketeers. The Three Musketeers, all four of them, are degenerates. I mean, there's really no other way to say it. The best thing you could say for them is that they're morally complex, and I think at worst you could just straight up say that they're bad people. And honestly, I lean more towards bad people than morally complex. These dudes are gamblers, they're drunks, they're womanizers, and one of them attempts to murder his wife, and the other one assaults a woman under the guise of her other lover. These dudes are not great people. And with that kind of setup of, these guys are also really awful, you would probably think that Dumas is, just supporting these men and showing that this kind of behavior is totally acceptable. But I think it's a little bit more complex than that. Instead of a black and white story of this woman's the problem and these men are the solution, or, it's okay that these men do it and this woman, it's not okay that she does it, I think Dumas is actually trying to wrestle with some really heavy topics, especially for the period of time in which he lived and which he's commentating on. I think instead of, attempting to just say, woman bad, these men are fine, even though they're literal criminals and murderers and thieves and awful people, I think he's saying, hey, Isn't it weird that there's this double standard for women in our society? Because a woman can be just as bad as a man, or a man can be just as bad as a woman. You know, a man can be a womanizer, a man can be a cheat, he can, attempt to kill his wife, he can do all these things, and we allow it because of his social position, because he has different genitalia. But if a woman does the exact same thing, if she poisons her husband, if she uses sex to gain power and gain favors, then it is bad. And I think that is utterly brilliant. I really think Dumas, despite his limitations, despite whether he succeeds or not, is at least attempting to critique the patriarchy during the time of his life. He is attempting to dismantle this idea of what nobility really looks like, of what chivalry really looks like, of what men in power actually do. Because this is a period where people were looking back and they were thinking, wow, well, society has really fallen. All these men, they used to go to war and they used to be really cool dudes, and they used to be so chivalrous and so chaste and all these things. And I think what Dumas is doing is looking at his culture and the time and saying, no, it actually wasn't that great back then. We're so much better now. We have come such a long way. And these men that you want to romanticize, these men that you want to prop up on a stool and say, look how virtuous they are, they were scumbags. They were morally messed up scumbags who were at best morally great people and at worst actual villains to the women and men around them who had different social positions. And that for me really, really works. Obviously, The Three Musketeers is a fun story. It is, one that has a lot of adventure. It has a lot of romance. It's one that's, honestly probably going to make you feel good more than anything. But it also really tackles a lot of deep and heavy themes in a way that is incredibly relevant to today's society. And I was really just surprised by how good it was and how well it handled these topics, especially for the period of time it was written in. I came in with the expectation that it was going to be this very black and white story about, good versus evil. And what I ended up getting was this much more morally complex conversation of what does society say about these actions? Who do we support? Who do we romanticize? And is it fair to women that there is this double social standard during the time in which he lived? Is it fair that this system is set up in this way? And I nailed it out of the park. Loved it. I loved the characters. I loved the story. I thought the pacing was excellent here. And honestly, it's just I'm surprised by how good this was. The themes are great, and it was just a genuinely very fun read. So 8.8 out of 10, Alexandre Dumas, you did it again.